And now it's a pleasure to ask Noel Howard of the Irish Association of Social Care Workers to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for having us here. Good morning to you all. I feel at a distinct disadvantage here in terms of my age. And when you look at me, you'll probably say, and many of the young people will say, sure, he'd say no to votes at 17 anyway. But for nearly 40 years, I had the privilege of working with young people in the Irish juvenile justice system. In that time, I was challenged, I was invigorated, and I got to know quite a lot about young people. In the next couple of minutes, I want to elaborate on the submission that we made, which was pretty crisp and it was pretty general. And obviously, many of the submissions made to the Convention, and what we have already heard this morning, make very cogent researched and persuasive arguments as to why the voting age should be 17. Many of these arguments, I believe, and I respectfully suggest, come from the head as opposed to the heart. Now, we make our argument as well from the head in part, but the main thrust of what I have to say in elaborating on the submission is around the preservation and protection of the concept of childhood. To our shame, we know that the landscape of childhood in this country has been littered with abuse, and all not in institutions or perpetrated just by religious. Contributing to all that was wrong and neglectful for children was a childcare system that until recently was kicked around like a political football, with the main victims being children. The many reports that have emanated over the past 20 or so years are a clear indication that despite the pipe dream we might aspire to in Ireland, not only was the concept of childhood ignored, but it was trodden on to such an extent that words failed to express the horror and tragedy of what many children experienced. But more on that just before I finish. Put another way, allowing, encouraging and fostering the real experience of childhood just did not exist. Members of our association, as you may know, work with, among others, marginalised and deprived children who have fallen through every net that was supposedly there to rescue them and make their lives fulfilling. The needs and aspirations of those less fortunate children are very far removed, we believe, from whether or not they have a vote at 17. That's a reality. Indeed, the work of our members is very often around restoring, where possible, with the help of other professionals, some semblance of the experience of childhood to those up to the age of 18 for whom childhood has been fractured, diluted or cruelly stolen in some cases. We say that aware of the fact that many 17-year-olds, and we've had them here this morning, may not be in that fragile category, but fortunately have been well looked after and respected by their parents, nurtured by their school and by their wider community. They are indeed privileged to have had the security and protection so necessary for their development. Yet even with all that, growing up can still be fraught with uncertainty and difficulty. Some of those fortunate young people may be very keen and interested in politics, and I have no doubt that you could get a room full of those children who would say yes to voting at 17. In fact, I believe you could probably get a room full of 15-year-olds who would say that there should be a vote at 15. However, as we know, the law states that they are still children up until the age of 18. And two pillars of our childcare legislation, the 91 Children Act and the 2001 Childcare Act, fought long and hard for, attest to that. That legislation does not allow for children, for example those under 18, to be named, for example, in court cases. The clean slate idea of the 2001 Childcare Act, whereby, as it were, a fresh start can apply, only kicks in when a child reaches the age of 18. We have a children's court where, apart from very serious crimes, those up to the age of 18 are dealt with. Why? Because they are considered to be children until they are 18. The 1991 Childcare Act, essentially drawn up around the welfare of children, sets extremely stringent parameters within which the identity of those up to the age of 18 is protected, and rightly so. You are all aware that for many years there were calls to end the imprisonment of 16 to 18-year-old children in St. Patrick's Institution. Commendably and in fairness, that process had begun, and in time we will see a purpose-built facility out in Overstown in North County Dublin to deal with those children. Why was it a scandal, and why was the European community castigating us for so long about not fulfilling our obligation in that respect? Because those in our legislation up to the age of 18 are children. One question is, will those rights that pertain for those up to the age of 18 be maintained or slowly eroded if at 17 they are on a voting register? Those children our members work with, and who may come within the scope of the legislation I've referred to, leave the care of the state at 18. Why? Because they are no longer considered to be children, and many of you here will be aware of the difficulties such children face when they reach the milestone considered to be adulthood. Think for a moment about your own leaving home at 18, or indeed your children leaving home at 18, on their first and steady steps into the adult world. Worry, apprehension, and indeed fear may well, as you know, be a feature of that transition for child and for parent. And that may have been with parents who prepared children well to leave with love, attention and care up to the age of 18. However, the child leaving state care on the cusp of adulthood may have been through multiple placements and may have come from a background of neglect and abuse of one kind or another. And yet, the aftercare provision for those children is at best patchy and erratic and at worst non-existent. But with all that many show a resilience and a sense of purpose that can put those of us more fortunate to shame. Another question then, if the voting age is reduced to 17, who is to say that down the road at some future stage the powers that be may not engineer a situation, and it would be a cynical one to engineer, that may involve bringing back to 17 the care leaving age, thus further reducing the preparation that care leavers need at a particularly vulnerable age. Might whatever rights and privileges now available to under 18s also be back to 17? And what would the argument be for such moves? Well, they are voters at 17. Of course, that would never happen here, or would it? At another level, there is a growing body of opinion, and I go back to Theresa's point on this, with studies in the UK and the United States concluding that neurologically, childhood development is seen as extending far beyond 18, and that young people have not arrived at adulthood at all by that age. Those emerging studies now indicate that neurologically what is called the mental merger, encompassing reasoning, planning and judgment, do not come together in the teenage years as we have thought for so long, but doesn't come together until well into the 20s. If then in law those up to the age of 18 are still children, and if neurologically at 17 their development is as the research shows, still at a very early stage, why bring them into what is widely considered to be an area that is fundamentally adult, that of exercising one's franchise, voting? There are other reasons in tandem with the above that calls into question the reduction in the voting age. Despite all we know, we somehow still believe that we as citizens of this state value all our children and cherish them. We decry what has happened to those who were abused and say it can never happen again. Perhaps one perceived step towards all of that is reducing the voting age to 17. Perhaps this is giving children of a certain age a voice. But wait, last November, we, the citizens of this state, had that chance to enshrine in our Constitution an amendment that would protect and vindicate by our laws the imprescriptible rights of all children, improve our adoption system, always consider as paramount the best interests of the child, and give the child a voice. And may I say here that our association and our parent body, Social Care Ireland, was fully behind that referendum, even though it mightn't have been evident at the time. And how was that to be done? It was to be done by those of us who our voting age, walking or driving to our local polling station and casting a vote on a Saturday. And what happened? 65% of us, despite all the hand-wringing, all the protestations, all the intentions toward the wrongs of the past never being repeated, and our cherishing all of the children of the nation equally, 65% of us didn't bother. From another important angle, I suggest reducing the voting age contradicts and upturns the view so often expressed by child advocacy groups, ourselves included, that children should be allowed to be children and live out their childhood. Let children be children. They will be adults long enough from the age of 18 with all that entails. That is a major belief, principle and conviction of our organisation, born out of the working with the most deprived and marginalised children. And we can only assume that it is fundamentally the same for other organisations. We believe this more especially now as we live in a modern, globalised and media-driven world, a world which is quickly eroding the concept of childhood, often for financial gain. This erosion of childhood is very often subtle, but sometimes unapologetically brash and openly exploitative. I do not have to elaborate for you on that onslaught, which, far from allowing children to positively experience their childhood and be children, is manipulated and takes advantage of the very thing that is so precious for them, their innocence and their sense of wonder. Extending voting rights, again I stress something that is widely considered to be grounded in adulthood and is an adult construct. Extending voting rights to a 17-year-old may be well-intentioned, but it is a flawed suggestion at best and tokenistic at worst. What it contributes to is a rush and a hurry to the adultification of children. I don't want to offend young people or patronise them, but we believe that to be a reality. Such a move is not born out of the needs, the protection and the uniqueness of young people. Such a move finds its roots in a different adult political reality and gain. Such a move does not put the young, developing, growing child first. It is a judgment made by adults with adulthood in mind. I don't think I have to remind people here of the hard, tough game that politics is. I would further say that the political system may simply have political gain in mind on this one. Politicians will seek the votes of 17-year-olds not to enhance or develop the concept of childhood, but for political gain, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But consider also that many over 18s, right up to old age, some of whom are keen students for the political system, are often unsure of how to interpret the agendas and blandishments of politicians at voting time. Indeed, some of our political commentators who are here today, astute and not too easily fooled, are often left scratching their heads metaphorically, and looking cynically bemused as they try to interpret what politicians and political parties really stand for. If children of 17 are on the voting register, politicians and the sophisticated political machines will not be approaching them at election time to inquire as to their circumstances. They will be approaching them to get their vote. And in the tough, hard-bitten political game, perhaps that's the way it is, and there's nothing wrong with it. That being the case, please do not expose our 17-year-olds to that, because behind the guise of concern and inclusivity may be another form of exploitation. Many 17-year-olds have had enough on their plate and have enough on their plate, looking for jobs, grappling with the Leaving Cert perhaps, beginning third-level education, or trying to make some sense of the adult world into which they are entering. In 2009, the Ryan Report was published, and its publication left church and state reeling. In the Dáil debate that followed, which many of you would be familiar with, all shades of political opinion were at one. After speaker valiantly attempted to find words to describe the horror of what Ryan had exposed. They and the journalists, long experienced in reporting on the more sordid aspects of Irish life, grappled with the English language to find appropriate expressions of revulsion. Consider some of the expressions used around that time.
No, could you
Gulags, Holocaust. There will be more reports that will come, and some of the comment on those is truly shocking. Having the concept of childhood enriched and preserved is important as children move towards adulthood at 18. And by the way, if we're reducing the voting age to 17, we may well be in some good company as indicated, but we may be in some dubious company as well. Ecuador, Nicaragua, Sudan, Indonesia, East Timor, and most interestingly, North Korea. To conclude, I mentioned the Ryan Report at Watershed. The first recommendation of the Ryan Report was to erect a memorial to the victims of abuse. That would be a physical memorial. You, the convention members, are, I respectfully suggest, in a unique position to erect a symbolic memorial to the memory of those children. By not reducing the voting age to 17, you can take a brave, perhaps controversial step to ensure that the victims of abuse and their stolen childhoods are never forgotten. And in taking that brave step, you will be looking backwards, but you will also be looking forward and seeking the understanding and support of 17-year-olds so that they too will not forget. And I have no doubt that their natural, spontaneous sense of generosity will make them understand that and grasp that opportunity. And into the future, when a 17-year-old asks their parents or their teacher, why can't I vote at 17 like they do in other countries? They will be told, in 2013, something called the Constitutional Convention decided so to preserve the concept of childhood as a gesture of respect to the memory of those who had no childhood, and in the knowledge that future 17-year-olds would not only agree with that sentiment, but generously support it. I ask you to consider such an approach on this issue. It is the best you, as representatives of all of us, might well do at this time for all our children, past, present, and future. Representing all of us as you do, it is the best we might do, but in view of our history and all we know about the abuse of children, it's perhaps the least we might do. Thank you very much.